everybody, this is Maya and this is day 3 of Novel Prep Month. I hope your brainstorming is going great. When I did yesterday's video, I was really encouraging you to take some time out of your day and do some really dynamic brainstorming. So did you take a walk? Did you get out a whiteboard and write all kinds of gibberish on it? Did you come up with 15 different ways that your original idea might actually be slightly different? I hope so. And I hope you continue that today. If you missed the day 1 video, I'm going to include that link in the down bar. And today we want to talk about why we're planning. I'm speaking to you, pantser, because I am a reformed pantser myself. And I'm also speaking to the plotters who maybe have used really regimented forms of plotting and have found it difficult or perhaps too regimented, not creative enough, or maybe they're finding that their writing just feels stilted somehow. And so really, I'm speaking to everybody. This is a really important topic, and it's something that I bristled against when I came online, because within the writing community on YouTube especially, there's a very strict divide between planner and a pantser. And honestly, I hate those two terms because they seem so diametrically opposed that you can't be one without being the other. And for those of you who are new, the idea is that a pantser just sits down and writes by the seat of their pants. And a plotter sits down and plots everything that's going to happen before they start writing. And it's two different schools of thought, and they're very different. And what I found is that very few people actually are one or the other, and that if you're one or the other, it's not even necessarily the best situation. A lot of times people will say, I'm a pantser, I can't plot, I'm incapable of plotting, plotting is boring, plotting stilts my creativity. And I think that those are all symptoms of the way that we're thinking about plotting. So let me just read a quote from George R.R. Martin and then talk a little bit about my own model of how I plan. George R.R. Martin said, "I think there are two types of writers, the architects and the gardeners. The architects plan everything ahead of time, like an architect building a house. They know how many rooms are going to be in the house, what kind of roof they're going to have, and where the wires are going to run, what kind of plumbing there's going to be. They have the whole thing designed and blueprinted out before they even nail the first board up. The gardeners dig a hole, drop in a seed, and water it. They kind of know what the seed is. They know if they planted a fantasy seed or a mystery seed or whatever, but as the plant comes up and they water it, they don't know how many branches it's going to have. They find out as it grows, and I'm much more of a gardener than an architect." Okay, so a lot of pantsers read that quote and they hear, oh, it's great, I can just go by the seat of my pants and it's fine. But the truth is, most professional writers are planners. Most professional writers who start their first book or even their first 2 novels pantsing eventually convert to becoming planners because it's actually an easier writing process. And that's what I want to get into today. When he says that a gardener just drops a seed in a hole and waters it, I've had a garden. That's not true. Gardeners need to know which direction they're planting in so that the sun can hit the seeds and so the seeds don't just mold and rot. Gardeners need to decide which plants go next to each other because some plants next to each other may attract bugs that will eat them, and some plants next to each other may get rid of bugs, may repel bugs. So if you have one plant that's really prone to bugs and another plant that actually repels bugs, you put them together. You have to plan your garden because if you plant the same thing on the same soil year after year, the soil goes dead and suddenly you don't have a garden anymore. There's a difference between a garden and just something that's gone wild. There's a reason why when I look around my area, I'm in Northern California, and this whole idea of having, landscaping that is natural is really big here. But there's a difference between really natural landscaping and letting your yard go wild. And what I look at when I think about planning and developing my writing is I look at it as a garden, but I'm looking at it more holistically. So I think this goes into where we get our joy. Some people, when they're writing, they're getting their same joy the same way they would read a book. So you read a book and you don't know what's going to happen. And as it's unfolding, you're getting excited because you're reading the book. A lot of people go into their first novel or two writing their book as if they're reading it. So they're getting their joy from discovering what's happening in the book as they're writing it. I've spoken with several novelists who literally spent 14, 12, 11 years writing their first novel because they wrote it that way. I've also read reviews from novelists who are well known to be pantsers, and they have really common pantser problems, such as the saggy middle. A lot of times, because you don't know what's happening, the middle of your novel can get bland. You can lose focus. It becomes less exciting. And when I read reviews that say this particular novelist has a great book, but the middle kind of lost its way, and then I read an interview several weeks later that says, I'm a pantser, that's why. Because if you go into the novel knowing what's going to happen, you're actually giving yourself a leg up. But people don't do it because they think it's not going to be enjoyable. I reject that notion. I think in addition to finding your joy as you're writing, you should plan in a way that is also joyful. That way, when you're planning, you're having fun, you're exploring, you're discovering the story as you're planning. And then when you're writing the novel, you're having fun, you're exploring the language, you're exploring the dialogue, you're breathing life into those characters. I think that we will all be better writers if we enjoy all aspects of writing. So, in short, I believe that gardeners can be planters, but gardeners can also be planners. But it's a more holistic type of planning. So instead of getting out a grid and saying you have your rising action here and you have your falling action here and you have your inciting incident here, no, you're going to look at it more holistically. You're going to look at your characters and say, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? Where are they going? What would they naturally do in response to this? You're going to look at the plot and see how one part of the plot affects the other part of the plot. And that brings us to the other reason why people say, I don't want to I'm a pantser, I'm never going to plot. Even if I plot everything out, it all changes when I write it anyway. Yes, it does. But that's the other benefit of planning. You see, when I wrote my first NaNoWriMo that I actually completed, that was the first time I'd actually ever planned anything. And I didn't plan that much. Before that, I had always been a pantser, and I had never completed the novel because something would change in the book and I just wouldn't know where to go next, or the middle would get really saggy and I wouldn't be able to get through it. When I did that first novel that I actually completed and something changed in the novel, I could foresee how that change would affect other things down the line because I had previously thought them out, so I could adjust them ahead of time. I didn't write myself into a hole because rather than changing something then not knowing where to go, I changed something and I knew that that thing was going to affect this, this, and this, and it made it so much easier. Pantsing is fun, it's creative, it's free flowing, but for something as big as a novel, personally, I don't think that it is the best way to go about it. And I think if you have the drive to write in any kind of long-term aspect, learning how to enjoy planning, finding a planning method that is right for you should become a priority. I think it will make everything much easier. So why do I say that it's important for NaNoWriMo? NaNoWriMo in particularly, you are writing 1,667 words a day, every day for 30 days. It's really structured. And if you run into a roadblock and you get one day behind, it can really be a pain in the ass to get caught up. If you have everything planned ahead of time, then every morning when you wake up to do your writing, you already know what's going to happen that day. Much like the book by Rachel Aaron said, you sit down each day and you look at what is going to happen in the next scene, and you close your eyes and you think about it, you dream about it, and maybe you write some ideas about what's going to happen, and then when you actually sit down to start writing, It flows. It's easy. You don't have to warm up. You don't have to figure out because you already are ready to go. Structure lends us room to be creative. And this is something that novelists bristle against, but if you talk to most serious poets, they will tell you this. They will say that they got really good at free-form poetry because they spent years doing structured poetry. That there are various poets that have spent periods of time playing with different structures, or maybe they write one form outside, but when they're just practicing, they will practice with some of the more classical forms. And that's because when you are free to write anything, it becomes really hard to write something. But if you restrict yourself in some way, then suddenly your brain becomes more creative in order to express itself within those boxes. And when I look at my outline or my novel plan, that's what I see. To the point where even if I'm writing a short story, I plan it ahead of time. Even if I'm writing flash fiction, I literally outline my flash fiction because it allows me to be more creative, not less creative. You know, yes, you may love pantsing, and this is what I have to say to you. You're free to pants all you want, but most likely it's going to take longer to finish projects. Your finished projects have a much higher chance of having saggy middle. It is going to be harder to restructure your novel. So the more work you put into the beginning of your novel, the less work you put into after the fact. So, perfect example, when I finished my first NaNoWriMo novel and I plotted it ahead of time, I didn't do the brainstorming portion that I'm having you do over the next couple days. I really just picked an idea and went with it. And when I outlined, I didn't use a snowball method. I found methods online and I tried to plot out the 3 acts and the rising and the falling. And then I wrote this novel and something wasn't working. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with this book because I did everything I was supposed to. Whereas if I would have brainstormed ahead of time and really thought through more at the beginning, I would have recognized that I was plotting a Greek tragedy as if it was a hero's journey. And that my core structure was actually the problem because my plot it was missing a crucial part of Aristotle's Poetics. And I never would have seen that. I would have spotted that if I would have plotted it ahead of time. I would have spotted it because this book is so much like all of Shakespeare's tragic plays. I would have spotted it if I would have thought it through more. Instead of saying, well, this author says that we have a hero and then this happens to them and then this happens to them, and just following what they say and then being confused why it doesn't fit. When you're planning, just know that you are doing creative work. This isn't something that you're doing so that you can be creative later. Planning is creative, but it also leads to easier writing sessions. It gives you a direction out of writer's block. It makes it easier to adjust to changes. It makes restructuring during editing so much easier. And most importantly, it puts girders underneath those saggy middles. So even if you are a diehard pantser, I encourage you to give planning a try. And if my type of planning doesn't work for you, then try something else. If you try a form of planning that's boring and you hate it, just stop and try a different method. There are as many ways of planning novels out there as there are novelists. And until tomorrow, ciao.